My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 29 years old, and on the evening of May 14th, 2025, the man I had spent 4 years building an empire with stood in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in New York City in front of 400 of the most powerful people in the state and publicly discarded me. He didn't just break off our engagement. He orchestrated a meticulously planned execution of my dignity. He wanted the city's elite to laugh at me. He wanted to prove his absolute loyalty to his new prize, the mayor's 24-year-old daughter. He thought I was just a naive architect who would run out of the ballroom in tears, destroyed and penniless. He had no idea about the man standing in the shadows by the ice sculpture. He didn't know what I had discovered 22 days prior. And he absolutely did not know that at exactly 9:42 p.m. that night, his fiercest billionaire rival would step into the blinding light of the chandeliers, slide a $1.5 million flawless diamond onto my finger, and utter 5 words that would obliterate my ex-fiancé's entire existence. That was the moment the universe corrected itself. But to understand the absolute devastation of that night, you have to understand the illusion I was living in. It started, like most devastating traps do, with a shared dream. October 2021. I was 25, a junior architect at a prestigious Manhattan firm, working 80-hour weeks and living on black coffee. Julian Sterling was 30. He was a rising real estate developer who had just bought an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn. He had the charisma of a politician and the aggressive hunger of a man who felt New York owed him a skyline. We met at a zoning board hearing. He was presenting a terrible generic design. I was the only one in the room who pointed out the structural flaws in his foundation plan. Instead of getting angry, he waited for me outside the municipal building in the pouring rain. He looked at me, completely soaked, and said, "You're the smartest person I've met in this city. Build this with me." Before we dive back in, take a second to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is for you. I personally read every single comment. I fell in love with his ambition, and then I fell in love with him. By our first anniversary, I had quit my firm to become the lead architect for Sterling Development. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar corporation back then. It was just the two of us, operating out of a cramped office in Chelsea. I drafted the blueprints. I calculated the load-bearing walls. I sat in on meetings with skeptical investors, acting as the grounded, practical voice that balanced Julian's wild, grandiose pitches. When we finally broke ground on his flagship project, the Sterling Tower, a sleek 40-story glass and steel marvel that I had designed from scratch, Julian bought us a penthouse in Tribeca. He didn't put my name on the deed. Quote 1, he had said, kissing my forehead. Quote 2, I believed him. That was my first mistake. Giving a man credit for the foundation you poured yourself. For 3 years, I was the invisible engine behind his meteoric rise. While he was on the cover of real estate magazines, I was the one pulling all-nighters to make sure the building didn't collapse. In December 2024, at the top of the Rockefeller Center, surrounded by snow and holiday lights, Julian dropped to one knee. He held out a beautiful 2-carat princess-cut diamond. "We're going to rule this city, Eleanor," he said. "Marry me." I cried. I said yes. I spent the next morning calling my parents in upstate New York, telling them I was marrying the man of my dreams. I didn't notice his choice of words. Rule. Not build, not live in, rule. The shift happened in February 2025. The city of New York announced the Hudson River Redevelopment Project. It was a $3 billion municipal contract to revitalize the West Side waterfront. It was the kind of deal that transitions a wealthy developer into a billionaire titan. Julian became obsessed. The competition was fierce, but his main obstacle was Vanguard Holdings, a massive, ruthless conglomerate run by a man named Sebastian Thorne. Sebastian Thorne was 38 years old money, brilliant, and possessed a net worth of approximately $8.5 billion. He was everything Julian was pretending to be. Julian was terrified of him. Julian paced our penthouse living room one night, nursing a glass of scotch. Mayor Thomas Kensington was notoriously corrupt, though the press had never managed to prove it. He also had a daughter, Chloe Kensington. She was 24, A staple of page 6, a self-proclaimed fashion influencer who spent her days taking selfies in front of infinity pools and spending her father's political leverage like loose change. I had met her once at a charity gala. She looked me up and down, noted my off-the-rack dress, and asked Julian, "Is this your assistant?" Julian had laughed. He didn't correct her. In March, Julian started coming home late. He claimed he was having closed-door lobbying meetings with the mayor's committee. He smelled different. Not his usual Tom Ford cologne, but something sweeter, floral. Le Labo Santal 33. I ignored the knot in my stomach. I told myself it was the stress of the Hudson bid. Then came the engagement party. Julian suddenly insisted we throw a massive 400-guest extravaganza. He wanted the grand ballroom at the Pierre Hotel. He wanted imported Dutch calla lilies. He wanted a 12-piece orchestra. "Julian, this is excessive," I told him, looking at the initial quotes. "It's a $92,000 event. We should save this money for the wedding." He grabbed my shoulders, looking at me with intense, manic energy. "Elle, you don't get it. This isn't just a party. It's a statement. If the mayor and his committee see that I can host the event of the decade, they'll know I have the financial stability to handle the Hudson project. It's an investment." "Then pay for it," I said. His face fell into a perfectly practiced mask of vulnerability. "My liquid assets are completely tied up in the escrow for the bid. If I pull cash now, the city will see a dip in my accounts and I'll lose the contract. I need you to cover the deposit and the vendors. I will pay you back double the second the contract is signed. Please, Elle, for our future." Because I loved him, because I trusted the life we had built, I liquidated my stock portfolio. 5 years of my personal savings, bonuses, and investments. $92,000 wired directly to the Pierre Hotel and the event planners. Every detail was in my name. I tasted the cakes. I picked the linens. I spent weeks designing an evening that I thought was the celebration of our love. April 22nd, 2025, 3 weeks before the party. I will remember the exact quality of the morning light filtering into the kitchen when my world shattered. Julian was in the shower. He had left his iPad on the marble island. We never looked at each other's devices. We didn't have to. But the screen lit up with a notification, an iMessage. The sender name was simply CK. The preview text read, "Daddy is so excited for the 14th. You're going to look so good dumping that boring architect. Miss your hands." I stopped breathing. The kitchen grew incredibly quiet. The sound of the shower running down the hall felt miles away. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely input his passcode. It was my birthday. He hadn't changed it. The iPad unlocked. I opened the message thread. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a meticulously documented timeline of betrayal dating back to January. Photos of Julian and Chloe Kensington in a suite at the Baccarat Hotel. Texts mocking my clothes, my background, my dedication to the architectural firm. And then, the true horror. I scrolled back to a conversation from April 10th. Chloe, Daddy said Vanguard Holdings is offering a better financial package for the Hudson project. You need to prove you're actually part of the family before he blocks Thorne. Julian, I told you I'm handling it. The engagement party is on the 14th. I'll announce that Eleanor and I are over and that you and I are officially engaged. The mayor gets his public alliance. I get the contract. 2 birds, 1 stone. Chloe, make sure all the important investors are there. I want her to cry in front of everyone. It'll be iconic. Julian, she's paying for the whole party anyway. It's poetic. Just wear the dress I bought you. I dropped the iPad onto the counter. My knees buckled. I slid down the kitchen cabinets and sat on the cold hardwood floor. He wasn't just cheating on me. He had manipulated me into spending my entire life savings to fund the very event where he planned to publicly humiliate me and announce his engagement to his mistress. He was going to use my money to buy his ticket into the mayor's family. I sat there for 20 minutes. I felt the initial wave of agonizing, suffocating grief, the kind that makes you want to scream until your throat bleeds. But then something else took over, a cold, absolute, terrifying clarity. Tears wouldn't get my money back. Confronting him would only give him the chance to spin the narrative, cancel the party, and leave me quietly in the dust. He wanted a public spectacle. He wanted an audience of 400 people. I decided, sitting on that floor, that I was going to give him exactly what he wanted. But I needed leverage. If I was going to survive a room full of billionaires and politicians, I needed a weapon bigger than a broken heart. I went to his home office. I opened his private laptop. For the next 3 hours, while he was at a site visit, I downloaded every file, every financial ledger, every email on his hard drive. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew Julian. He cut corners. At 2 p.m., I found it, a hidden folder labeled Sterling Tower Compliance. Inside were the structural safety approvals submitted to the city 3 months ago. The documents authorized the use of a cheaper, substandard steel alloy for the upper 20 floors of the building. The signature at the bottom of the approval form was mine, Eleanor Vance, lead architect. But I had never signed it. I had explicitly rejected that steel grade in November. Julian had forged my signature. He had saved millions of dollars on construction, compromised the integrity of a 40-story building, and set me up to take the fall for a federal crime if the structure ever failed. I didn't cry anymore. I packed my laptop, put my engagement ring back on my finger, and left the apartment. I went to a burner phone store in Chinatown, bought a cheap prepaid device, and made one phone call to the only man in New York City who hated Julian Sterling as much as I now did. Quote 20, a crisp voice answered. Quote 21, I said, standing in the rain on Canal Street. Quote 22. There was a pause. Then the voice said, quote 23. I walked into the dark, wood-paneled lounge of the Mandarin Oriental. It was empty, except for a man sitting in the corner booth, Sebastian Thorne. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, sipping a neat bourbon. He looked exactly like a man who controlled billions of dollars, utterly calm, dangerously observant, and entirely out of Julian's league. I slid into the booth across from him. He didn't offer a pleasantry. Quote 24, he said, his voice a low, commanding baritone. Quote 25, I placed a thick manila folder on the table and slid it toward him. Quote 26, Sebastian didn't blink. He opened the folder. He spent 3 minutes reading the printed emails, the forged safety documents, and the text messages. I watched his eyes scan the proof of the mayor's corruption. When he finally looked up, the air in the room felt different. The temperature had dropped. Quote 27, Sebastian said softly, closing the folder. Quote 28, he leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine. Quote 29, quote 30, I said, my voice steady. Quote 31. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Sebastian Thorne's face. The Hudson contract is mine. The mayor will be indicted. And Julian, he tapped the folder, Julian will go to federal prison. But if we are going to do this, we do it my way. We don't just expose him, we obliterate him. I need an inside trigger. I need you to play the perfect, oblivious, loving fiancé for the next 3 weeks. Can you do that? I looked at the ring on my finger, the illusion. I can do that. Good, Sebastian said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a sleek black business card with only a private number on it. We have a lot of work to do. For the next 21 days, I lived a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every morning, I woke up, kissed Julian's cheek, and made him coffee. Every evening, I sat on the couch with him and finalized the seating chart for the Pierre Hotel. Quote 37, I would ask, playing the naive bride. Quote 38, Julian would reply, barely looking up from his phone, probably texting Chloe. Quote 39, quote 40, I would say. Quote 41, he would agree, a sickening, smug smile playing on his lips. While he slept, I was in the guest room on the encrypted burner phone, coordinating with Sebastian and his army of corporate lawyers and private investigators. We traced Julian's offshore accounts. We found the $50 million he owed to a private equity firm in Dubai. Sebastian's team quietly bought up Julian's debt. We were setting explosive charges on the foundation of his life, one wire transfer at a time. The hardest part was the final dress fitting. I stood in front of a mirror in a bridal boutique in Soho, wearing a custom emerald green silk gown. It was stunning. The seamstress asked if the groom would cry when he saw me. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were cold. "Oh," I said softly, "I guarantee there will be tears." May 14th, 2025, the day of the party. I arrived at the Pierre Hotel at 4 p.m. to oversee the setup. The grand ballroom was breathtaking. Thousands of white calla lilies cascaded from crystal vases. The 12-piece orchestra was tuning their instruments. 400 place settings with gold-rimmed chargers gleamed under the chandeliers. I stood in the center of the room and took a deep breath. This was my funeral pyre, and I was holding the match. At 7 p.m., the guests began to arrive. The wealth and power in the room were suffocating. State senators, real estate moguls, Broadway producers. Julian worked the room like a king holding court. He looked incredibly handsome in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He kept his hand on the small of my back, playing the role of the devoted partner for the cameras. But his eyes kept darting to the entrance. At 7:45 p.m., Mayor Thomas Kensington arrived, flanked by security. And right beside him was Chloe. Chloe wore a white silk gown, a bridal gown, at an engagement party that wasn't hers. The sheer audacity of it sent a physical ripple of whispers through the VIP tables. Julian excused himself from my side immediately. I watched him cross the room, his eyes fixed on Chloe with a sickening mixture of lust and ambition. He kissed her cheek, lingering a second too long, then shook the mayor's hand with both of his own. I stood alone near the towering champagne fountain, sipping sparkling water, feeling the collective gaze of 400 people shift between us. They could smell the blood in the water. The elite of New York always can. Some looked at me with pity, others with barely concealed amusement. I smiled back at them, a perfectly calm, placid smile. Let them enjoy the appetizer. The main course was coming. By 9 p.m., the volume in the ballroom had reached a deafening crescendo. The caviar had been served. The 12-piece orchestra was playing a sweeping, dramatic waltz. Julian had barely spoken to me for an hour. He was firmly anchored to the Kensington table, laughing loudly at the mayor's jokes, his hand resting casually on the back of Chloe's chair. My phone buzzed inside my clutch. One text message from an unknown number. Quote 44. It was Sebastian. At 9:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped abruptly. Julian tapped a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing cut through the chatter. The room quieted, turning toward the grand stage at the front of the ballroom. Julian walked up the steps, adjusting his tuxedo jacket, exuding the confidence of a man who believed he held the world on a string. He took the microphone. Quote 45. His voice boomed over the state-of-the-art sound system I had paid for. Quote 46. He paused, looking directly at Mayor Kensington. Quote 47. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Julian turned his gaze to me. His eyes were flat, completely devoid of the love he had faked for 4 years. Quote 48, he said, his tone dripping with manufactured condescension. Quote 49. Gasps echoed off the vaulted ceilings. A woman near me covered her mouth. I stood perfectly still, my hands folded gracefully in front of my emerald gown. Quote 50, Julian continued, his voice rising in triumph. Quote 51. Chloe stood up, beaming, blowing a theatrical kiss to Julian. The mayor clapped proudly, a smug, greedy smile on his face. And then the darkest part of high society revealed itself. A few of Julian's sycophantic investors started clapping. Then Chloe laughed, a sharp, mocking, echoing sound directed straight at me. Soon, the polite, cruel laughter of the city's elite joined in. They were laughing at the naive architect who had paid for her own public execution. Julian looked down from the stage, basking in his grotesque victory. Quote 52, he said off mic, but loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. Underscore quote underscore 53 underscore. He wanted me to break. He was waiting for the tears, the hysteria, the desperate pleading that would cement his dominance. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just checked my watch. 9:41 p.m. and 50 seconds. Before the laughter could stretch into agony, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They were shoved open with such force that they slammed against the walls. The sound was like a gunshot. The laughter died instantly. The room froze. A man walked in, tall, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying dominance. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. Whispers ignited like wildfire, replacing the laughter with pure shock. Quote 54, quote 55, quote 56. Julian's smug smile vanished. The color drained from his face entirely. He gripped the microphone, his knuckles turning white. Mayor Kensington half stood from his chair, his jaw slack. Sebastian Thorne didn't look at either of them. He walked straight down the center aisle, his dark eyes locked entirely on me. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket, pulled out a midnight blue velvet box, and snapped it open. Inside sat a 15-carat, flawless emerald-cut diamond. The light caught it, sending fractured prisms across the walls. It was a $1.5 million weapon. The entire ballroom stopped breathing. Sebastian looked down at me, his voice carrying the weight of an empire, yet intimate enough to send a shiver down my spine. Quote 57, he whispered. I held out my left hand. He slid the heavy, blinding diamond onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He kissed the back of my hand, a gesture of absolute possession and respect, then turned slowly to face the stage. Julian was stammering, his voice cracking over the speakers. Quote 58. Sebastian's voice echoed without a microphone, calm, deadly, and carrying to every corner of the vast room. Quote 59. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Sebastian raised a single hand, and the room instantly silenced, obeying him with a terrified reverence. Quote 60. Sebastian snapped his fingers. The massive projection screens behind the stage, the ones Julian intended to use to display his architectural renders, flashed blue. Then, high-resolution documents appeared. White text, highlighted figures, bank statements. Quote 61. Sebastian announced, his voice cutting like a scythe through the ballroom. Quote 62. Julian looked like he had been physically struck. Quote 63. He screamed. Sebastian clicked a small remote. New documents appeared. Emails between Julian and the mayor's office. Furthermore, Sebastian continued mercilessly, Julian attempted to bribe city officials to secure the Hudson contract, promising kickbacks routed through Chloe Kensington's fake charity foundation. The wire transfers and encrypted messages are on the screen for everyone to read. The crowd gasped. Investors who had been laughing 3 minutes ago were now shouting, pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their lawyers. The mayor turned ghostly pale, clutching his chest. Chloe shrieked, "Daddy, make him stop!" But the cameras were already flashing. The socialites had their phones out, recording every second of the spectacular downfall. And the most despicable act of all, Sebastian said, his tone turning venomous. He pointed at the screen, which now showed the forged structural safety approvals. He forged the safety signatures of his lead architect, Eleanor Vance, to cover his use of substandard materials in the Sterling Tower, a federal crime that carries a 20-year sentence. Sebastian looked directly at the mayor, who was now sweating through his custom suit. I forwarded the entire dossier to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the SEC, and the New York Times 2 hours ago. The FBI is waiting in the lobby. Julian dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a deafening metallic screech that made people cover their ears. He looked at Chloe, desperate, his empire crumbling to dust in real time. "Chloe, tell them it's a misunderstanding. We can fix this." Chloe backed away from him as if he were diseased, her face twisted in disgust. "Don't talk to me. You're broke," she screamed, hiking up her white gown and running toward her father. The mayor grabbed her arm and tried to push through the crowd toward the side exit, but 2 men in dark suits stepped into the doorway, federal badges gleaming on their belts, blocking their path. The ballroom was in absolute chaos, pandemonium. Julian fell to his knees on the stage, his hands clutching his head, sobbing openly. His reputation, his freedom, his future evaporated in exactly 4 minutes. I stood next to Sebastian, the million-dollar weight of the diamond on my finger grounding me. I looked down at the man who had tried to bury me. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. The crowd watched with bated breath, the shouting dying down as they realized I was about to speak. I walked over to the dropped microphone. I picked it up gracefully, the emerald silk of my gown pooling around my feet. Julian looked up at me, mascara running down his face from where Chloe had briefly pressed against him, tears streaming from his eyes. Elle, please," he begged, his voice a pathetic, broken whisper. "You know me. We built this together. Tell them I'm a good guy. Please, I'll give you anything." I looked at him with the exact same condescending pity he had given me just moments before. I held the microphone to my lips. My voice was crisp, steady, and echoing through the silent room. "I told you I'd help you build your future, Julian," I said. "I never said I wouldn't be the one to tear it down." I dropped the microphone back onto the stage. It landed with a dull thud. I turned my back on him and walked down the stairs. Sebastian offered his arm. I took it. Together, we walked down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. No one spoke. The crowd of billionaires, politicians, and socialites parted for us in absolute, terrified awe. As we reached the mahogany doors, I heard the metallic click of handcuffs echoing from the front of the room, followed by the sound of Julian Sterling being read his Miranda rights. That night, we didn't go to the police station. We didn't answer the hundreds of frantic phone calls from the press. Sebastian took me to the roof of Vanguard Tower, overlooking the glittering, sprawling expanse of Manhattan. He poured 2 glasses of Macallan 64. He handed me one. "To the architect," he said, clinking his crystal glass against mine. "To the demolition," I replied. The scotch burned perfectly on the way down. The fallout was spectacular, a bloodbath printed in black and white. The New York Times ran the story on the front page the next morning. Julian's tear-stained face was plastered everywhere under the headline, "The Billion-Dollar Fiancé Fraud." He pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. He was sentenced to 14 years in a minimum security prison in Pennsylvania. My $92,000 was fully refunded from his seized assets, along with a substantial settlement for the forged documents. Mayor Kensington was forced to resign in absolute disgrace 2 weeks later, facing a massive federal corruption probe. Chloe lost her trust fund when the city froze her father's assets. Last I heard, she was promoting discount detox tea on a severely diminished social media account, living in a studio apartment in Queens. As for me, Sebastian and I didn't rush into a romance. The ring was a prop, a brilliant theatrical weapon designed to shatter Julian's ego and establish absolute dominance. But as the months passed, as we worked together to audit Julian's remaining assets and fix the structural integrity of his buildings, the partnership became real. By December 2025, Vanguard Holdings officially won the Hudson River redevelopment project. Sebastian didn't hire me as a consultant. He named me the lead architect. Not because I was his partner, but because I was the best visionary in the city. I redesigned the waterfront. I built glass towers that reflected the sunrise, structurally sound, built on a foundation of truth and solid steel. 2 years later, on a quiet Tuesday morning in our shared townhouse on the Upper East Side, the snow falling softly outside the window, Sebastian handed me that same midnight blue velvet box. This time, there was no audience, no cameras, no enemies to destroy, just us. "Put on this ring," he whispered, his dark eyes soft, completely vulnerable. "For real this time." I did. If you are out there, shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's shadow, waiting for the day they finally appreciate your sacrifices, stop. If they are willing to humiliate you, they don't love you. They are using you. Don't beg for a seat at their table. Let them pull the chair out from under you. Let them laugh. Because while they are busy gloating, you have the opportunity to buy the entire building and evict them. Sometimes the most devastating betrayal is a gift. Sometimes the loss of a fake future is the only thing that opens the door to real power. The city skyline looks beautiful tonight, and every time I look out at it, I know one thing for certain. Julian tried to bury me. He just didn't realize I was the architect. I know how to build from the underground up.